In the beginning, John said was the word. 33 years he tabernacled the earth. Healing the sick, raising the dead, sight to the blind. In the city of Canaan, turned water to wine.
Robert Banks makes an interesting note for all Christians. He says, and I quote, that Christians tend to take their work, their families, and their communities a lot more serious than everybody else. And while we're commended for doing that, he warns that if we're not careful, we can become as trains. He says, always on the move, always in a rush, and always late. And while that may be humorous, it's also true that with the quick, fast pace and ticking and talking of our society that we live in, if we're not careful, you can somewhat think, maybe even act, as if God singled you out and shorted you on time. But with all the inequalities in our lives and all the inequalities in this world, one thing we all share in common, and that is that we all share the same amount of time. 24 hours, and every day God has given each of us. So if you find your time slipping by and you find that you're not able to take hold of the time in your life, it's a direct indication that somewhere your priorities have turned upside down. Those things that really matter all of a sudden have slid down your priority into the basement of forgetfulness. And those things that are so minor have began to rise to the top of your priority system. So instead of asking God for more time, we all must rush to ask God, Lord, please help us to be better stewards of the time that you already have blessed us with. In the Bible, Psalms number 90, verse 12, we find some insight from God to help us with this thing called time. Verse 12, it says, Psalms 90, verse 12, so teach us to number our days, that we may present to you a heart of wisdom. I'm going to read that again. Teach us to number our days, that we may present to you a heart of wisdom. In this psalm, the writer, Moses, one of God's early leaders in the Bible, he wanted his life to really count for God. In other words, he wanted eternal value. We live in a day and time where we live for right now. We live in the moment. But we don't hardly think about the eternal value of our time. In this psalm, he prayed to God that God would somehow help him to stay devoted to counting his days and really making every day count for God. Can you say that you're doing that? Are you making every day count for God? If you really want to take hold of time and be a better steward with God's time, it starts with a goal and a plan that's centered around God's Word. And the only way to do that is to center yourself in God's Word. So the first milestone for really taking over time, taking hold of God's time, is for you to start a daily reading of God's Word. Some of the reasons that you may not want to do that, number one, you'll say you don't have time. Well, I was ready for that, and so I bring in a resource today, the Daily Bible. This particular Bible would consist of 15-minute readings. If you read this Bible 15 to 20 minutes a day, you will have completed the whole Bible from front to back within 1 year. 15 minutes. I think God can get 15 minutes out of 24 hours. What about you? The others of you that are thinking, well, I would read the Bible, but I just don't understand. This same resource has clips and inserts to guide you through every passage and answer those questions that you may not have. This is a great resource where you don't have to go into the Bible with your eyes blindfolded. So if you don't feel comfortable, this book will help you. If you don't have time, this book will help you. It's the NIV Daily Bible in chronological order. A must read if you're serious about taking over the time that God has given you. He expects you to be a manager if you're going to be a steward. How are you managing God's time? If you're not in God's Word, you don't have the steps and the principles to set your priorities on biblical passages. Those passages that you find in God's daily Word will strengthen you to take over God's time. It's time to take over God's time. What will you do this time? Until next time, God bless. See you then.
He did die. 3 days later, Jesus Christ did